Hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. What's going on, Steve? Are you painting or are you cooking? Well, I'm painting actually, although there's a recipe involved. You know, it's funny. This is a medium that I've been curious about for a while. Something I've been meaning to experiment with for at least 4 years, probably 5. One of my favorite artists, Andrew Wyeth, is a big painter of egg tempera. So I just have to try it. I mean, I have to satisfy some of my curiosity, and I'm willing to spend a tiny bit of money to do it. Today, though, is mainly about a painting, and I want to just talk through, when I get to the painting, I want to just talk through the way I experience and some of my experience in dealing with new mediums. For those of you who have absolutely no idea what egg tempera is, this is going to be a little explanation, and I am not going to spend long on this, okay? And you can take what I say with a tiny grain of salt. I have done my research, but I am not experienced as an egg tempera painter. So I am just learning those things now. Egg tempera is simply using the yolk of an egg as your binder instead of a traditional binder like oil, or in the case of watercolor, gum arabic. In the case of acrylic, it'd be an acrylic polymer. Traditionally, it's been used with dry pigments. And it kind of reached its height in the late 15th century. When oil came along, that kind of all replaced egg tempera, except for iconography. And there are icon painters today that still use it. But it's seen a bit of a resurgence. It has both advantages and disadvantages. It's not something I thought I ever wanted to do until I saw a painting by Stan Miller. Stan Miller, who's a wonderful portraitist, beautiful landscape painter, he does a good bit of egg tempera, and he does it, some of it, with watercolor, you know, the watercolor out of a tube and the egg yolk on watercolor paper. And that got my attention. So I'm always looking for things that might spoke off of watercolor and make good mixed media challenges, or add-ons, you might say. So let me just really quickly, you start off with an egg, crack the egg, and you separate it. Oops, I dropped it. You avid cooks out there know how to separate an egg from the white. Just kind of back and forth in the shell. Needs to be a really fresh egg, because what you're after is the yolk that's inside the yolk sac. And on not quite so fresh eggs, the yolk sac breaks down. So you have to be able to hold that. And I may have broken it already. Generally, you need to be able to take the yolk sac and see it's already broken. So this egg may not be as fresh as it needs to be. I kind of brutalized it a bit.
So when we crack it, we must not torment it. We must be merciful and execute it quickly, like with the guillotine.
All right, let's try this again. I'm glad that happened, actually, with the last one. It kind of shows you what happens when the egg is not very fresh. You try to get as much of that white off of there as possible. And some will put it in a paper towel and roll it. Depends on how strong the egg sac is. I think since the last one broke, I'm going to put it in my hand, a little gentler. And basically you can roll it back and forth on your hand, dry your hand off. That's a method. But you want the egg sac to stay intact like this. When you're done, just basically hold it over your container, and you pierce the sac, and you drain the egg sac, or the yolk sac. If you get a good fresh egg, it's really pretty simple. You just don't want that egg sac in there. Basically, now all you do is mix an equal part of water with that. So I'm looking to see how much I have. I use a distilled water. Recipes will vary, but for the most part, what you'll find is a 1-to-1 ratio, egg yolk to water. And then a lot of recipes call for a few drops of vinegar, anywhere from 1 to a few drops per egg. I like to put 3 or 4. Mix it up real good. And that, my friends, is your binder. That's actually the easy part. I've done that several times, and I never found it that difficult, except when I didn't have a fresh egg, then it got all over everything. And the traditional way of doing it is with this, the binder, a powdered pigment, and a gesso panel. Now, the gesso panel is a special process. It's a rabbit skin glue gesso with a chalk whitener. Apparently, acrylic gesso does not work. The egg just doesn't stick. However, because that's not something I want to mess with, this rabbit skin glue. I've been on good authority that Ampersand's clay board and or their aqua board works. Or to put it more simply, a absorbent ground. I prefer more of a tooth. So the aqua board has a tooth to it, but it's an absorbent ground. But you can prepare your own boards with any sort of watercolor ground coating. However, again, back to what intrigued me the most was watercolor. And I'm going to link to Stan Miller's video where he demonstrates it. He does it on Arches watercolor paper. I'm doing it today off of this Crescent watercolor board. It is a thick museum board, 100% cotton, 100% archival. And egg apparently needs or is best on a very rigid surface because it is not very flexible. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And I'm excited about experimenting with the possibilities of mixing egg tempera for detail with watercolor. One last thing before we start. If you're saying to me, oh, wow, yeah, I really want to know more about this. Here's a couple of books that I've kind of read up on. First of all is this one, Egg Tempera Painting, A Comprehensive Guide by Koo Shadler. She's probably one of the foremost authorities on both the historical processes and all of the other recipes out there for the egg tempera medium. I mean, this is comprehensive, and it's not cheap. She put this book together. I think she may actually be publishing a bound version now. Not a cheap book, but it is extensive. It covers literally everything you might want to cover about egg tempera painting. And another book, which is kind of neat, is New Techniques in Egg Tempera. This is Robert Vickery. Some nice plates in here to look at if you want to see what's possible with the medium. I don't necessarily recommend this book if you're just curious. If I'm not mistaken, it's about $50 now, and it really gets deep into the weeds. So, but I just wanted to make you aware of them. All right, as we get into the painting, I will talk about a number of things, my experience with it, the pluses and the minuses, and what I've learned so far. So let's go do it. All right, well, as with most things, I'm going to start with pencil drawing. And this pencil drawing is going to be very tight. I'm going to talk a lot about what's traditional with egg tempera. In reality, I've seen all kinds of things lately. You can do expressive work, abstract work. What is traditional, though, is very, very tightly rendered pieces. And it's a very transparent medium built up in glazes, very thin glazes. And that immediately appealed to me when I first heard of it. Anyway, to kind of facilitate that, I'm doing an extremely detailed drawing. It's just an HB pencil, very fine HB pencil. I'm even going to add a little bit of shading here and there. So again, it's going to be a very refined drawing. I worked a good bit of time on this. I probably spent as much time drawing this almost as painting. Well, I know. I think I probably did. Not almost. This bird kind of made a good choice, I thought, for me. It was going to be easy to paint. I'm not painting a background other than just I'm going to hint at some of the texture in that limb. This bird is a white-breasted nuthatch, so they're fairly monochromatic, sort of a blue-gray, slate gray. They'll usually get a little bit of brown around the rump area, but for the most part, it's a gray, blue-gray bird and a white bird. So I liked that. I liked the low pressure of playing with a new medium in just one color, essentially, or two colors at most. I used ultramarine blue and black, and I used a gouache, as I mentioned in my intro area. Some Da Vinci gouache I have hanging around that I don't use for anything else. All right, as I start to paint, let me just kind of show you the process I decided to use. I'm actually using gouache. This is a gouache I don't really use. You can use watercolor. That's what Stan Miller uses. I read that gouache has a higher pigment to binder ratio, so I'm trying to keep the gum arabic binder quantity down. So basically, you can mix any amount. It's a small painting, and I was trying to mix very small amounts. I would just basically squeeze it up and put that down. Concentrated amount right out of the tube. You get your egg mixture. From this point, the process differs greatly among egg tempera artists. Some of them will put out a big pile of paint. I guess it depends on how big an area they're painting, how much painting they're going to do during the day, and they'll just mix up a whole bunch. Some will just dip their brush right in the egg and mix as they go, which is probably going to be closer to what I'm going to do going forward. I tried all sorts of things throughout this painting, but this was primarily what I tried. If I didn't have any down here at all, any egg, I would bring some down just to get me started. And again, the ratio here, egg versus paint, is about 1-to-1, although it may vary with pigment. So that seems to be the most question part, is how much egg to how much pigment, and how different is it with this versus powdered pigment. I got a lot of air bubbles since I shook that. The only standardized ratio I've been able to see is that they say it's probably more likely that you're going to have a problem if you don't use enough egg. I have heard some say, oh, you don't want it to get too eggy, but then I've also seen where some egg tempera painters will paint pure egg mixture on the surface just to coat it. So I really don't know. The key is, and the number one rule is thin. Very, 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 very thin layers. That is about the consistency of melted ice cream or heavy cream. Now that the paint is tempered, and that's what I just did. I tempered the paint. Thus the name Tempera. Once that's done, you can thin it with water as much as you want to. And when I read that, I was like, yay, that's awesome. Now you're speaking my language. So we're going to get that out here, and we're off and running. And that's an extremely thin layer. But you can put literally hundreds of these, and they're so transparent, and that's, I think, one of the beauties of it. And that's what I'm hoping to explore. And it supposedly, it probably depends on how much water I have, dries really, really fast. All kinds of techniques out there. I mean, you can scumble, you can dry brush, and it's very hard edge. So it's not a medium that blends. There are other recipes for egg tempera. I mean, you can really get deep into the woods, such as tempera grassa, which uses a linseed oil in the emulsion. And then there's like a bunch of different recipes for that. So anyway, this is my process. The paint's tempered with egg, about a 1-to-1 ratio roughly, thinned with water to the consistency that you want to paint. I'm actually wondering, and this is what I will probably do a lot of experimenting on in the future, how much egg I can add, because that makes it dry faster. All kinds of strategies about you go by the sheen, you don't go by the sheen. I don't know. It's one of those things that I got to figure out. But so far, I'm enjoying learning about this, and this is the process I'm using so far. I actually have a few powdered pigments that I bought. We'll try those at a future date, see how they compare to watercolor or gouache. Yeah, so we'll see where it takes me. I have no idea. I may shelve it entirely. Back to the painting. All right, so we're going to begin with those very, very thin layers. And I went very gingerly. Now, any of you that are still watching that are really interested in watercolor and not egg tempera, I hope you'll hang on, because really the process I went through painting in this, I would have done it exactly the same if this were watercolor. So you can watch and just be thinking about this as watercolor if you have absolutely no interest in egg tempera. Egg tempera has been put down or painted both ways, both the light to dark method or the dark to light method. dark to light, usually opaque mediums like oil, acrylic is what you'll hear. Light to dark is how I usually paint with watercolor, and I'm doing that here. Light to dark just leaves the highlights as white as possible, or leaves the paper for the highlights, which is, as you know, how transparent watercolor is usually approached. You can do the same thing with egg tempera. In fact, a lot of egg tempera painters prefer and recommend that. However, you can start dark or midtones and going down to the darks, or you can do both. I like working, as I said, like with watercolor, going light to dark, but then if I need to go back and add in some highlights back over the darks, I can do that. And egg tempera facilitates all of that. But again, here I'm just working down into the darks. Most of this, as I've already mentioned, is ultramarine mixed with black. Black tends to have a bit of a green tint to it, which actually was very useful here because this is a sort of a slate blue coloration on this bird. I would sort of vary the color from a very gray mixture, especially in the white parts of the body, to more blue in the feathers. There's some really interesting egg tempera painters out there. Historically, I showed you the Vickery book. George Tucker is another one historically. Colin Fraser is another one. And if you just Google egg tempera examples, you'll see a lot of it. You'll also see a lot of religious iconography, which is a tradition that's being continued even today. That probably equates most to the medieval traditions of how it's done. But as I was looking at YouTube videos and other sites, I saw all kinds of stuff. I saw abstract, expressionistic, you name it. I think, though, for me, what I'm mainly interested in is the luminosity. I don't see much point, since it is and can be so similar to how watercolor can look. I don't see much point unless I can achieve something extra, something different from watercolor. And for me, I'm exploring the idea that that's a deep jewel-like luminosity, which is what it has a reputation for. Now, I'm not sure I had enough layers on this bird to really exploit that strength. I did feel like I got a richer, deeper color than I would have by layering watercolor. But Stan Miller says, for example, that you need 9 or 10 layers before egg tempera really lights up. So I'm kind of taking that under advisement. One of the things that's exciting me, and I don't know how possible this is going to be, but I don't see why it wouldn't be, is how to combine this with regular watercolor. Now, traditional egg tempera painters can spend literally hours. I mean, it's a very painstaking process, and they will like completely fill in backgrounds with layers and strokes, and not necessarily something I want to do in a small case like this, where I think this is like 8 by 8 roughly, the board. The details in the bird, that's pretty easy to manage. If I had to fill that whole background with all these layers, I'm not sure I'd be up for that. But why couldn't I combine this in detailed portions of an image with washier, more expressive watercolor backgrounds? As long as it paints on watercolor board or watercolor paper just fine, why not? Well, the other thing I wanted to talk about is just how I approach a new medium, and how I suggest anybody approach a new medium. I get a lot of people that are beginners in watercolor, perhaps even coming at it from a different medium like oil, and they don't know where to start, don't know what to do. Of course, educate yourself as much as possible. In this day and age, we have so much access to knowledge and examples of videos that we have a lot of advantages over the past. So there's that. But you must experience a medium and you must make your own discoveries. It's just absolutely necessary. I can't tell you how essential that is. You must take the knowledge and the ideas that people give you and put them into practice. If for no other reason, just to demonstrate it to yourself. A lot of people will see things, they will look easy, and then when they try it, they find out it's not. Take to heart the quote unquote rules that you will hear about any medium, but take them with a grain of salt and always ask why. If you hear something that sounds like a rule, like never do this or always do this, always ask why. Why should I? I think that's a really good rule of thumb. There are a lot of rules that just get repeated, and most people don't even know why. Well, I really have enjoyed my first serious attempt with this medium. I mean, really, I love drawing and painting birds, and this fell just really naturally into this subject, and I think it turned out okay. I have some other things I'm going to try with this medium. Here's the finished result. Hope you guys like this video. Thank you so much, patrons, for your support. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.